Welcome to another episode of Tech Unhinged, where tech gets human. I'm your host, Rabia Javed. Then joining me today is Joel Grossman, Chief Information Officer at IMG Academy, where he oversees technology for both the physical campus and digital platforms. Joel spent over 25 years in leadership, including CTO roles at Legacy.com, iProspect, and nearly a decade at Leapfrog Online, serving Fortune 500 clients. He's also founder and mentor at Techstars Chicago. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you very much, Robbie. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are the CIO at IMG Academy, right? Which is one of the world's leading sports training campuses. And you also oversee NCSA college recruiting, which is probably the largest college recruiting platform in the country. For people who work in traditional tech roles, what does a CIO's day-to-day actually look like when your users are like, elite athletes, coaches, and families navigating college recruiting? And how is it different from leading tech at a SaaS company or enterprise?
Yeah, it's certainly very different, and right now is a unique moment. I spent most of my career, as you mentioned, building technology platforms and digital products for sort of internet scale consumer facing businesses. So this was the first time about halfway through my tenure here at the Academy where I had to confront not just a very different kind of environment in terms of who's present and who my stakeholders are, but a very much 24/7 in-person environment. So day to day, the CIO role is one where I'm operating in close partnership with a few different folks. The CTO, who oversees the overall Academy's technology strategy and is a little bit more upward and forward facing. My focus is really, in the last 8 months or so, has been very much on campus. The day-to-day role of the CIO, really in a business that is one half roughly remote and kind of largely organized that way. That's the precursor entity that we today call the online business in IMG Academy, the core of which was NCSA and another business called Sports Recruits we acquired recently, and several other new ones that we built. That's very much a remote business. The IT portions of that world are pretty well defined and well structured. They're kind of the traditional back office businesses of a SaaS or tech-enabled services business, where the focus is largely on making sure that the product and engineering teams have the tools that they need, which is a pretty straightforward stack for software engineering. A large sales and marketing function or commercial function has the tools that they need. And then somewhat uniquely in what we do in recruiting and developmental coaching, we have to make sure that a different class of coaches have the tools they need to interact with student athletes seeking to play sports in college or develop their specific talents. And that's really about internal tools and applications that provide context and guidance on what's the next best thing to help this family or help this student athlete on their journey towards development goals or recruiting. The campus business, where my focus has really been the last year, is an interesting and entirely different beast. I like to describe the campus environment, we call it one of one, and it truly is. The way that I describe it is it's like if you are running Hogwarts at the Olympic Village inside Disneyland. It is a totally unique environment. It is several hundred acres, many, many buildings, world-class facilities for training and playing sports. There is a hotel. There is a golf club. There are events for tens of thousands of people there several times a year. Professional athletes and teams and leagues are there frequently to train and play. It is a small town in its own right. And so given most of my background and history has been in kind of developing software behind the scenes for people that I don't get a chance to see, especially at this moment of frontier models kind of reshaping how technology works, being able to interact on a day-to-day basis with a lot of people, delivering, creating, facilitating excellence in young people, young athletes. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to do, and frankly, quite a lot more fulfilling than sort of the pure development of software for strangers has been for me. Not that that isn't fun, and I've had many, many years of wonderful time building teams and building software and products to do that. But at this moment with frontier models, what's working on campus is it's very wide, right? We're building enterprise systems, we're building infrastructure, we're building platforms for our customers who are student athletes and their parents, and for other visitors to campus. So there's a lot of day-to-day swings back and forth. But I think to sort of generalize across the use cases, it is about knowledgeable practice, right? We have coaches, we have athletes, we have people who are recruiting coaches and specialists in the college space, all with lots of deep tacit expertise about how these things work. And my job is to really instrument them with the tools they need to do that work more efficiently and make sure that their specific expertise is developed and maintained and delivered as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Also, Joel, you joined in 2020 as their first ever CTO when the company was already 20 years old. What was the state of the technology when you walked in, and what was the biggest gap you needed to close at that time?
Yeah, so Rabia, the history there is interesting. So IMG Academy today, like I said, has several different businesses, and I came in through that precursor business, NCSA, which, as you said, was 20 years old at the time. Most of the latter part of my career has been walking knowingly into situations like this. I like to describe myself as a restructuring CTO, and restructuring being both in the sense of kind of M&A or corporate development changes, new investors, new ownership, new product strategy, new corporate strategy, new market dynamics, and then trying to reconnect or connect in the first place the technology function to achieve a higher degree of technical leverage in the business. So that means dealing with vast amounts of technical debt. It means dealing with cultural and organizational dynamics throughout the organization, senior leadership teams, mid-level management, folks in the trenches writing software or building configuration. And frankly, walking in, I think it was a known mess. So it was very clear that the technology as an asset needed a great deal of work. It was very, very functional in the context of a business that grew on a meteoric basis for 20 years straight, and continued to grow as I arrived. But the scalability of that business and its ability to develop more and new and differentiated products as the competition increased and sort of the sophistication of parents and student athletes increased, that was a material block. The first thing obviously is a large scale assessment. And one of the most common patterns and one that we applied, we used the term the replay to describe it, basically to say, look, we have repeated ourselves several times. We have invested in multiple different layers of technology or products. Let's be, ruthless in assessing which of those things have scale, which of those things have legs, and frankly, which increase the optionality of the business, right? To move in particular directions, whether that's specific features or capabilities or subsets of the market, segments that we want to tackle in different ways, make those technical plans supportive of the accumulation of revenue and EBITDA in a way that scales, as opposed to, the sort of, because frankly, the NCSA business is great and remains great at generating a lot of outcomes from a recruiting performance standpoint. There's so much more that has emerged, especially in the last 5 years, in terms of what we can do to help in recruiting and what we can do to help in athletic and personal development. And so being able to create a set of digital products at a decreasing marginal cost was really kind of the mission. And the fact that we were acquired twice in that first 4 years made it a fairly interesting exercise to kind of rebuild and create a platform from what was some fairly disconnected parts that were working great in the context of a very sales-driven organization to facilitate a shift to more of a product-led growth organization. That was really the mission, and one that I'm pleased we got done. And our ability to release digital products of increasing sophistication and speed is kind of where I handed things off to our CTO Jen Schwartz. So we're making a ton of progress coming out of what was a frankly pretty messy state of affairs back in 2020.
I can't really imagine, what was that mess like, but Joel, AI is everywhere in 2026, but in sports, it's not just probably a buzzword. It's embedded in how athletes, they train, get scouted, and develop. For someone outside the sports world, and our listeners in particular, can you paint a picture of where AI is actually being used today at IMG Academy or NCSA? And what does AI in sports concretely mean in your environment?
Yeah, so I think let me answer that more broadly across sport. I've had the privilege of really understanding a great deal the science behind performance in athletics, but more broadly beyond simply what we do at the Academy. If you think about AI in sort of the pre-large language model broader sense in which we began talking about it, there are a number of different ways in which we see the use of AI. So I think the first wave of things, or maybe the first one that I really had to confront, was the use of computer vision and biometrics biomechanical analysis around movement, tools, hardware, software, camera, wearables that track motion, and look at how athletes are moving in real time to understand what they can do, where they're going, and kind of how they're performing in field and on training. So that's a big part of the landscape. Related, beginning certainly in the professional world, but certainly making its way down to youth athletic development in a big way, would be looking at load monitoring and injury risk and periodization, which I can talk about in a little bit more detail, but basically understanding streams of biometric data to look at the level of training to prevent overtraining before breakdown, injury prevention and remediation, patterns of movement and physical stress that allow for optimization of training and recovery. And lots of great work being done by startups in that space right now. The NFL is doing some great work with their digital athlete tool in the professional leagues. I think there's also a huge amount, and certainly we see this with our online recruiting business, of identifying talent and scouting at scale. So we have so much data on performance available in video feeds from companies like Huddle or Game Changer that are just, sharing data publicly about, particularly in youth athletics, where are the great athletes, and not just the standouts, but where are the strong performers? Because as young athletes are developing in talent, their ability to play in different contexts and fulfill different roles on school teams, on club teams, and on college teams, and then eventually professional teams, those are all really, really dramatically scalable capabilities. There's also a lot of work as it relates to automated video. So this is a huge area of utilization on campus in particular, but also in our recruiting businesses where, we are looking at highlights and recaps of performance and play and training and turning that into ways for student athletes to differentiate themselves and show what they're capable of doing, but also to kind of compress the workflow of understanding what could be done differently, how could performance be improved, how are teams playing together effectively or not, competing against different kinds of opponents. I think those are the big sort of generalized cases. I'm sure I'm forgetting several more, but as it relates to campus, back in 2022, 23, as the models started to develop, and this is before, February of this year, where everything kind of changed with Opus 4.6, the way that we try to think about AI and the AI moment in this period of time in technological development in sport is the accumulation of training data, right? So while the large language models are superb and will continue to grow in their ability to process and equipped with the right context, answer all sorts of questions at greater speed and scale than ever before, at the end of the day, and as I think about a lot in terms of what's happening in traditional SaaS companies, it is those companies who have unique and proprietary data sets that can inform and make the best use of AI in a variety of different contexts that kind of come out ahead. And so, the Academy is a place where we have both in the context of recruiting and in the context of athletic and personal development. And, we have this immense amount of data about what works and how we can help student athletes perform and win their future. And in that context, I think it boils down to, if you are collecting the data properly, which we do, for broad use cases. It's AI for facilitation. So that's the direct application of AI in teaching and training and coaching developing student athletes. It's AI for augmentation, which is kind of the more traditional, what we used to call machine learning, but in different ways and at different speeds, leveraging AI for insights and analysis and automation to either generate net new capabilities for understanding or greater efficiency scale for existing ones. Third would be for prediction. So like I said, the companies and the organizations that accumulate the most context and training data are the ones that tend to win in the long term in the current moment. And so if we're able to use the sum total of our collected data to identify potential outcomes or directions that might be helpful for our customers and our business, then that's super powerful. And then the last, which I think is the most unique in our campus business, where we have a very, very close loop interaction where we can see how did what happened on the field today affect how we're going to coach or train tomorrow, we can build AI models that move beyond prediction of what might happen into suggesting specific courses of action to our teammates, our coaches of whatever sorts. We have, I think it's something like 10 coaches that are non-sport specific for every sport specific coach on campus. That's for nutrition and mental conditioning, for, injury recovery, or for things like leadership. And certainly we have, a number of teachers. Those sorts of abilities to say, hey, here's what we could do to increase the likelihood of a positive outcome for this particular student athlete. That is where I think we are at the edge of what's possible and growing every day. So that's kind of where we are. And it's an exciting time because the cycles of developing those capabilities are certainly increasing dramatically almost every frontier model release.
Oh, I hear you. And, some great initiatives that have been taken and done. But if we talk about the recruiting side there, and here we would want to analyze a bit, on the agent versus the human scout side. So
Yes.
we know that AI is changing the processes. You can talk a bit more about if that is happening at the academy right now or not. But do you think that we are moving toward a world where algorithm identifies the next great quarterback before a human scout can do?
I think that this is sort of the crux question and one that we're looking at. All of us are kind of experiencing across a wide range of domains, not just sports. My personal take is that barring really dramatic AGI style, changes in the landscape, there is an inevitable human dimension as it relates to the use of AI in recruiting outcomes, and more broadly in kind of the athletic development life cycle in youth sports. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that at present, there are dynamics in terms of what often is called coachability that may not be obvious from performance data. For individual sports, it may be a little bit different in that, that individual tennis player, golf player is a self-contained unit that you can look at in a number of different dimensions. But when we think about team sports, I think it gets a lot different because number one, the tenure of a college coach, just as one example, is probably averages about a year. So we tend to think about in kind of the marquee sports like football and basketball, these beloved coaches who hang around for a long time. But the truth is in other sports, you have a year, you come in as a coach, you're trying to figure out what you have, what your recruiting capabilities are, what you need, who your graduating seniors are. There's certainly an immense amount of data and it's available more rapidly than ever before to help you understand what a given student athlete might be able to do on the field. But I think there is a human judgment element. So that human judgment element is about the interaction between those players on the field or even on a team of in an individual sport. So I think AI is great at speeding up the process of identifying the pool of potential people to be interested in. But the element that we bring in our online recruiting businesses of people who have played those sports, who have traveled the road of what is involved for you to show up every day at 5:30 in the morning while carrying a full course load and, training and competing, whether at a D3, a JUCO, a D2, D1, whatever level of effort and whatever sport, that is still a fairly human judgment kind of a domain. And the recruiting coaches in our business have that human experience. So I think it is, what at the very beginning of the birth of large language models used to call sort of the centaur mode, where it's a human but augmented with AI capabilities. That to me seems like where we are at present. The speed of I think the AI is the horse parts. The speed of the horse parts is probably increasing pretty dramatically, but I do think there is a human judgment in a specific domain. And more broadly, if you were to assess the extent to which judgment and consideration is present in large language models outside of deterministic cases, like say code bases that are well understood, I don't think that we're there yet. It doesn't mean that we might not get there, but I still think there is a tremendous amount of context and judgment that is experientially accumulated by people who have gone through the process that is unavoidably and materially useful for parents and student athletes navigating the recruiting process.
Joel, how does leading technology for a mission-driven organization like IMG changes your priorities or how do you measure that kind of tech success?
I spent the earlier parts of my career in and sort of a core chunk of time. You mentioned earlier my time at Leapfrog Online. We're building a technology platform and building a business in customer acquisition for the better part of a decade, where the mission was really the craft, right? I've had the privilege of working with a number of people who've traveled with me from organization to organization over 3, 4, 5 different employers, where our focus on craft and the way that we built software and the way that we operated a team was kind of the mission. And we were a tool given to a business to kind of create better outcomes for fairly sizable clients. After that experience, for me, it became obvious that the actual thing to be done, the meat of the work, needed to play a more central role for me. And that was behind my decision to go work at legacy.com, where, though in a somewhat difficult period of time in people's lives at end of life, the mission was really about helping people in their time of need. And that was very, very fulfilling, though in the middle of COVID, certainly not the most upbeat job to have. All of this is to say, I am extremely grateful every single day to wake up, and particularly days that I am on campus, to be working not only in a mission-driven organization, but to be working in an organization whose focus is to help young people develop, and particularly young people, whether it is in what tend to be more elite athletes on campus, or those who simply want the experience, the very rewarding and developmentally massively important experience of playing sports in college to achieve their futures. We think a lot about certainly the financial performance of a business. We are owned by a large private equity fund. And so like any other business, the efficiency of that business and its profitability are certainly top of mind. But the beautiful thing about being in a mission-driven business like IMG Academy is that the better job we do supporting our teammates with technology, the better job we do helping them support our student athletes and our parents and families and our visitors to campus and anyone else that is making use of our facilities and capabilities, we're driving not only a social good in creating people who are better prepared to contribute to the organizations they become a part of and the society more broadly because of that experience, that focusing experience that sport has. I didn't grow up playing competitive sports. I wrestled in high school. I've kind of done Olympic sports to keep myself healthy. Big cyclist, used to do martial arts, but I did not have that team sports experience beyond wrestling in high school. And I think in observing and interacting with student athletes, both in our recruiting business and on campus and our development digital product businesses, it is tangible, it is visible, it is recognizable watching people, and young people in particular, authentically commit to developing themselves. And you see the excellence all around you. It is a thrilling thing to watch. So from a motivational standpoint, obviously, waking up every day and knowing, hey, I'm helping this kid who is giving it their all at age 14, at age 12 sometimes, at even younger in sports like tennis and golf, to become great, to try their hardest every day, and to have the honor of helping coaches who are all in every single day in helping, whether that's in a sport, whether that's in mental conditioning or strength training, or our dorm mentors who are providing leadership skills and kind of helping young people who are navigating the challenge of being in school, of playing sports in a very, very competitive environment and developing themselves. That is a privilege. So from an outcome standpoint, I think being in a technology leadership role is about access and tools and, do you have the software or hardware that you need to get the job done, or increasingly like the data assets and the AI capabilities, to we're here to help produce an outcome. And that outcome is a social good, it is an economic good, but at the end of the day, it's a human being that ends up, with a level of preparedness to contribute to whatever they choose to do. And that's a beautiful thing to be able to facilitate. It keeps us honest and keeps us focused in a way that few other businesses I've worked in are able to produce.
No, I think that's a great way to put it. Also, Joel, when you're trying to introduce AI-driven features on top of legacy infrastructure, what really breaks? What's the biggest technical challenge in modernizing a 20-year-old platform without disrupting millions of users. Now you can probably quote an example.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first wave of really materially powerful frontier models altered the dynamic a bit. In the earlier days and in the earlier models, there still was a widespread notion, and certainly I think in the broader sort of senior leadership, COOs, chief commercial officers, CEOs, that we would still have to do the kinds of large scale data warehousing kinds of projects in order to achieve utility out of large language models and introducing AI driven features. And I think that remains partially true, but the speed at which we're able to overcome what would have been multi-year large scale assembly of data, refining of data, structuring of data problems it's been a sea change in a very, very short amount of time. So while I do think it remains the case that applying large language models either for analytics use cases or even feature building, whether that's kind of chat-based agents or different kinds of recommendation engines that are more large language model powered, the actual technical implementations are not particularly difficult. I think that for me, the hardest part is sort of a semantic abstraction issue, right? So we don't really, for the scale of businesses that we're in, if this was a startup and we're starting from scratch, it would be a different thing. But as you mentioned, our recruiting business is 20 years old. The campus has been around for even longer. So it's not like a rip and replace situation. What we generally have done, as has been the case with a lot of technical debt scenarios I've dealt with, is to sort of build a scaffolding on top of what exists and slowly replace pieces in order to make it more efficient to use, in this case, AI, either to refactor or as sort of adding feature capabilities. I think the hard part is largely organizational, not technical. So you have to sequence that change so the platform is not, debilitated for any given set of users in the middle of adding those features. We have found that the tasks that used to be more challenging in terms of articulating complicated data models that we could use, or data structures and databases to enable answering questions or enabling particular kinds of features, be they for recommendation or what we call in our recruiting business matching. Here's a set of schools that you might want to consider based on your set of attributes as a student athlete, or hey coach, here's a set of student athletes that you might want to look at and talk to. Those sorts of features existed with older style of AI and kind of traditional machine learning techniques. So it wasn't a huge shift to bring in large language models into that context. But what we have found, and particularly on campus, this is relevant as we think about applying AI to performance science and sports science, is there are ways to integrate sets of data, particularly kind of hardware-based biomechanical measurements, and where is this player on a field, or combinations of, hey, here's the GPS location of a set of players on fields in competition, plus specific performance measurements that are literally on their body. Those are things that would have taken a long, long time just to do the integration work before you could assemble a training data set. That is now measured in weeks. So the large, heavy lifts of assembling data in a warehouse or star schema, those sorts of things that we did even 5 years ago, we can kind of do reconnaissance by fire. We can find out where the mismatches are, where the missing pieces of data, where, the set of things that we need to join together in order to answer questions are, more by asking the questions of the data and then doing a lot of adversarial review of both the structure of the data, the way that we're assembling the features and the outcomes in order to get increasingly accurate and useful models. So it's kind of this push-pull where, just to use campus examples, some of our leading data scientists in terms of performance and sports science are building new models every couple of weeks. We're kind of figuring out how to assemble the data in ways that help them do that with greater efficiency, which then results in them saying, hey, I can bring this new data set in or incorporate it in different ways. And so we're kind of going through this almost like, I'm a cyclist. So bicycle, the bicycle crank is going where their needs kind of generate assembly of data, preparedness of the model, training cycles, which then result in further advances to their ability to model the data and kind of do analysis. And that's been the case in earnest for about, the last 8 months at a really, really fast pace. So it's an exciting time to be doing this.
And recently you've also been transitioned from CTO to CIO. Yeah. So, expanding your scope to include both campus and digital operations. Your focus has been on accelerating technical leverage leverage on the campus as well, and that we've discussed at length too. But what does that
Yeah.
actually look like when you're dealing, with the physical facility serving 200,000 annual visitors versus, taking care of a digital platform?
Yeah, that's been I would describe it as an unexpected pleasure and challenge, right? So I'm like we said earlier, I tend to do restructuring. So I think the campus environment, like I said, is a very, very unique one. And the earlier parts of my career, I would never have imagined kind of being the CIO of what is effectively, a small town in Florida, filled with some very, very special people, all trying to and delivering, succeeding in delivering excellence. So there are dimensions of technology around operations, facility, logistics, campus safety. We have a fleet of golf carts running around campus. We have a hotel. We have, a number of different dormitories and very unique sports specific facilities and 40 fields and a number of different things in place. I think the most interesting part of working in a facility like that, which combines the most unique aspects of hospitality and education and athletic training facilities and event space, right? There's so many things that happen on campus. So some of it is maintaining a degree of visibility across an extraordinarily wide set of responsibilities. And so being able to keep tabs on what's happening on campus in and of itself so that we can be most effective, that was really the first year's goal when my team took on full responsibility for campus, and so I've dived in greater detail. I think the most important thing at the moment is because of the existence of the frontier models and what large language models can do, we have seen a tremendous growth in the ability of the very credentialed and experienced and capable experts on campus, whether that's in leadership or in strength and conditioning or in injury recovery or teaching math or leadership or whatever the case may be, to use the large language models to build their own software. So it's timely to have this conversation now. Yesterday, we launched what we're calling the Campus Apps Garden. Campus Apps Garden is a place where non-technical users or non-technology staff who are developing solutions in the context of what's usually a browser-based session with Claude or ChatGPT can develop their ideas locally for as long and in whatever depth is necessary, and then hand that over to our team, add some things that may not be obvious for people who are not traditional software developers, right? So Claude and ChatGPT are great at building, kind of single page applications that are extremely complicated and specific, very individualized use cases. But once they get out of the browser, tend to break down, right? They don't have persistent data storage, or they don't have, different kinds of access control, or don't consider cybersecurity issues, or, don't have workflow engines that would scale beyond one person operating it in a browser. So what we are building is a set of services and an infrastructure environment that allows any user on campus with a compelling idea to take what they're doing in conversations with an agent and then bring that to technology staff to kind of kick the tires a little bit, try and understand what they're doing, and then equip that with a set of services that we can then hand over as prompts to the agent that they're working with to say, hey, layer on these APIs that you can use for persistent data storage. Here's an API that you can use for managing role-based authentication and access control. Here's an API that will give you access to these source systems on campus that we have to be pretty careful about, who gets access to what, but more importantly, who has canonical or access to canonical data. There are many, many different kinds of flavors of software on campus. And so getting access to all that information for a single agent who doesn't have that context because they're just operating in a browser session pretty tough. We're making it easy for us to inform agents and non-technical users on how to layer those things on and build really immensely powerful applications and put them in a safe, scalable production environment that allow anyone on campus or in our digital businesses to make use of them. And that has been an amazing thing. It's a very different style of development and a style of developing IT than I think has existed previously, because it democratizes the process of leveraging technology. It removes some of the constraints that exist around resources or staffing. I don't have infinity, we're not a Silicon Valley company. I don't have infinity developers to work work with, and I don't, have a huge number of senior software engineers, but what I do have are a small team of really skilled people who are great at building, almost like the giant robot suit that basketball coach can put on and go, hey, I know a ton about how to drill developing basketball players, and I've worked with ChatGPT to think about how I want to do that, but I don't know how to share that with my fellow colleagues, or maybe even take that capability and apply it to volleyball coach. And so we're creating tools that allow that kind of local development to have all of the rigor and robustness and scalability and resilience and security safety that production consumer grade internet applications would have. Knock on wood that they're all that secure. Put those well behind the corporate firewall and make them available to anyone who would want to use them. And that's going to be a lot of development over the next couple of years.
These were some really interesting insights that how, orgs are thinking about going into this particular direction. And we're also seeing, AI shift from individual tools to full platforms, as you also talked about. AI as a service. In sports, that means things like dynamic ticket pricing, AI agents that summarize sponsorship calls and generate ROI reports, automated highlight reels. So is that where, the academy is headed, where they would be treating AI like infrastructure rather than a feature? What does that transition look like?
I think it's different in each of our businesses. So in our digital products businesses, there is certainly active and ongoing utilization of AI capabilities as features, simply because the recruiting process, one-on-one coaching, our IMG Academy Essentials product, those all really make good use of AI in the actual delivery of content and coaching and recommendations. And so that's always going to be part of the exercise. And again, recruiting is very much a two-sided marketplace. So we're as much trying to help the college and university and that coach figure out, how to most efficiently and effectively find the talent they need for their team, as much as we're trying to create a great outcome so that student athlete, not only is playing their sport in college, but succeeding in playing that sport. And on senior day, they're showing up having not just, produced great outcomes for their team and for themselves, but really a fully formed human that is ready to take on whatever the next challenge will be. So that there is an AI part to that. As it relates to our campus business, I think it is much more in that infrastructure, right? So when you are delivering middle school, high school education in a boarding school environment, when you are delivering, campus safety for a wide-ranging event space of really unique capabilities and proportions, when you are delivering, extraordinary levels of sophistication and quality in athletic training across, 14, 15, 16, we keep adding different sports with their own unique sets of capabilities, as well as our proprietary athletic and personal development methodology. Those have to make use of infrastructure. It is not, I think, economically feasible to expect moving forward that it is only in technology organizations where the ability to use technology is going to scale. We have to create, just in the same way we're creating agentic harnesses to do our software development, we're creating AI harnesses as technologists to let people who have really specific and detailed expertise, performance scientists and recovery specialists and physical therapists and, people who help high school students navigate the challenges, emotional and physical, of being, an elite athlete and just being a high school student, just being a teenager. They, benefit from having AI tooling and capabilities. And so that is a pretty sacred mission for us, to give them what they need and allow them to self-service as much as possible, not just to reduce the cost of technology, but to actually create better outcomes for our student athletes to win their future.
There's also a lot of hype around AI for injury prevention and performance optimization, wearables tracking, biometrics, computer vision analyzing movements, but you're actually implementing this at IMG as well. So with your experience, what you've seen, how much of it is real and what is still experimental?
Yes. So you mentioned earlier in my career, I had the privilege of working with Troy Hennicoff. It was the founding of Techstars Chicago, and so spent a fair amount of time, but earlier as a startup founder myself, and then later as a mentor to startups, and still doing that today. The Academy, and particularly campus, is a place where a great number of different startups in that space show up with a range of things from promises to extraordinary products. So we do see, and a lot that works. I think some of the more interesting things that we see right now are the intersections between the wearables technology and sort of the machine vision. So intersections between, cameras on the field or cameras in the weight room, devices that the student athletes are wearing, be that for biomechanical measurements, but increasingly kind of neurological assessments. We're starting to get to a place where there is a holistic monitoring capability, very much tied to, or it almost feels like it's been waiting to catch up to the sports science. So the sports science, and I mentioned earlier periodization. I think periodization is a big part of what we do at the Academy, which is trying to understand how to create sort of these macro, meso, and micro cycles of development that match both the events taking place in a regular school year, right, for our student athletes, but also at the team level, what are the competition events that are happening, and match that to, okay, what's happening in the weight room on any given day, or what are the series of things that we're working on in a given week for this particular student athlete and this particular team. That is a complex execution, and the ability to instrument that entire cycle of development, which we've been doing for a long, long time, without AI tools. I'm starting to see again that sort of bicycle cranking happening, where the amount of data that we have and our ability to process it is increasing. So for us, the startups are bringing really unique hardware, software solutions to that measurement cycle and performance assessment. One of the startups that we've been working with most recently is a company called Athos, who has done a great job in taking what is a very complex and sport-specific set of developmental capabilities and guidelines for how we're, training softball players and golf players, and giving coaches really thoughtfully curated data sets and using AI within the product to generate insights about kind of where that student athlete may be in the context of developmental cycles or injury prevention, or, in very exciting moments, sort of where they're coming to local maxima of their performance capability, and reshifting the training plan to say, what, you're at a place where you are performing at peak. You have a game coming up. Let's take it down a notch to prepare. Or, what, your weight training has been here. We're seeing that your performance over the last couple of weeks suggests that we probably could go to the next level. That is happening every day now, ongoing conversation. And part of what is really unique to the Academy is the ability to have these world-class sport and performance scientists and the coaches who have all the context of how to develop student athletes in those given positions and teams in sports. That cycle is really, really data-driven in ways that are not sort of, here's some useful suggestions, which is great, and I think a great deal of past history, but now are, fast cycles of hypothesis, experiment, recommendation, result, and adaptation in a day. I mean, that's, we've been operating at the day cycle for a long time at the Academy, but now the level of insight that we're able to deploy, whether that's from sort of, the tools we have for measurement, the player data and purchase of the world, or tools like I mentioned with Athos, those are creating a very, very rich environment for analysis, assessment, and making it easier for coaches, be they sport coaches or development performance science coaches, to make very specific recommendations and interventions in a way that not only helps them understand kind of that cycle of development, but also helps the student athlete understand what's happening to them and to their body and to their capability, which is very exciting. I think it's easy to look at this as technology that's happening to people, but what I think is very interesting, because so many of the student athletes on campus are, we used to use the term digital native. I think we're beyond that. They are assumptive that there is a lot of data being assembled about them that they're creating, and they are conversant with it. They understand, their measurements. They understand what happened yesterday and are looking at it and participating in that conversation with their coaches and with their teachers as well. So it's an exciting time to see how this is applied on campus.
We know that, this is something which is inevitable, and we cannot now ignore it anymore to make it part of the processes. But how do you think about fairness when we talk about AI? AI and its fairness, and it not hallucinating or giving decisions that might lead towards, existing inequities that we already have. So what safeguards are there in place to make sure that that the technology is not reinforcing those existing iniquities?
As we began to develop policy around AI, obviously the first generation of that was a little bit more about security and auditability and kind of data provenance. I think the conversation shifted fairly quickly to these questions. The Academy has always been a place where a focus on fairness is sort of bred into our DNA. I think that there's the perception that every single student athlete at the Academy and every single, recruit in our online businesses is a top tier elite athlete, but that is not the case. There are people at all different levels. And again, for us, sport is a lens through which we're helping to make better people as much as we are making better athletes. And so for that reason, I think the biggest tool that we wield and has been a big part of the development of policy and training for our staff is about this issue of fairness. And the tool that we use for that is adversarial review, right? So adversarial review, which really is a kind of a term of art coming out of more technology fields, is a way that when we are getting specific recommendations that are coming out of a large language model, we're subjecting that recommendation to, especially in strategic decision making, to assessments from not only other humans, but from other agents, to really pick apart and ask questions about fairness and about bias. Again, the models are extraordinary in their capability, but they're also extraordinary in their ability for those who are not paying attention to kind of assume perfect context, which just doesn't exist. So by forcing adversarial review, by sticking to kind of the values that are kind of, ever present on campus, which include ones about fairness, we're ensuring that reflex exists, both at the level of how are we developing this software using AI features, or how are we equipping our coaches and our teachers and our dorm mentors and our other staff with these tools in a way that we're not reinforcing those biases. I think there's a widespread awareness, and I think, my team has really tried to be not so much a backstop, but just kind of a guide in saying, hey, these models were built on training data that is essentially, started with the public internet of the last 5-6 years. That has lots of built-in biases in it. Certainly the models themselves and the people that develop these models carry with them a variety of different biases. And I think it's fair to say I'm part of the tribe of that set of people who bring with them kind of engineering thought processes and software thought processes and kind of nerd thought processes that make their way into the model. And so, I don't think that there's a magical panacea for this in the same way, though I wish there was a magical panacea for fairness across the society as a whole. What we have to do is to put these guardrails in place and constant reminders and training to say, especially when we're dealing with issues of fairness and also accuracy and also pragmatism, right? In much the same way, I think fairness is certainly of ethical importance than any of these other criteria, but the models themselves are reasonably accomplished when contextualized properly to say, and I have this built into all of my agentic harnesses, right? Like, please apply, a significant degree of doubt on recency bias, right? Or on a number of other biases. And, we try and build those into the technology that we're using. And we've built those certainly into our policy and training.
Joel, give us one real moment, something that, went hilariously wrong or surprisingly right with AI in the sports context.
Let's see. I think the best example I could give you would be around periodization. So one of the joys of my job is I'm constantly learning, right? So I don't have a background in training in performance science and sports science, though I'm proud to work with leaders in that space. Dr. Taryn Morgan, who leads our athletic and personal development team, is probably chief among them. And, I've learned so much from her about how periodization, as I mentioned, works and kind of the thought process behind that. And so as a software engineer and a technologist, when it came to trying to figure out how we would build automation and large language model capabilities into our approach to periodization and its implementation on campus, I looked at that problem as a fairly complex complicated and unfamiliar one. But in the last probably 6 months, a lot of my effort has been in building tooling that allows for the decomposition of complicated problems in performance science into more manageable chunks that teams of agents can kind of address. So literally yesterday, a couple of my colleagues presented me with a fairly tight time constraint need for a specific application around periodization, which needed to be very, very thoughtful about sport-specific differences in, how we want to create training cycles and how those relate to a variety of different constraints around how campus works, right? There's a lot of capacity to train in the weight room, a lot of capacity on fields, but we have 1,600 kids here, plus, thousands, tens of thousands of campers, the logistics of all of that, plus the desired kind of performance science outcomes. Like, that's a fairly complex data set. In a very short amount of time, I was able to build a first iteration of a solution to that problem that was commensurate with published research that exists around periodization in sports science, and delivered the functional capabilities to automate some very, very time-consuming and difficult problems. So I did not expect that first iteration to go well, and I spent probably more time attempting to falsify the hypotheses and sort of assess biases in the code, but it works, and was able to kind of put that in our AI application infrastructure in pretty record time yesterday. So it's just a lot of fun right now, especially because in that context, in developing AI, I have the privilege of being able to work closely with my collaborators in a way that building software for the public internet just doesn't afford. And that's not that I don't enjoy that, and that's not a wonderful calling. However, being able to go, literally toe to toe and moment to moment with really skilled experts in sport and sports science, develop software for them to solve complex problems and have them give me immediate feedback and fix in fast cycles, because my ability to iterate and prototype and then build for scale is so much faster. It's joyous, and I can't describe it any other way. It's helping really, really skilled people do hard things, which is why I got into doing technology in the first place.
No, that's great. And I think we've come a long way in the conversation as well. And, these are incredible initiatives that you're taking at IMG Academy Plus. Here's a one-liner that I'm going to throw, and I want you to tell me your thoughts on that. AI is now most heavily for game analytics, fan engagement, and predicting player performance and injuries. Knowing what you know about where this is all headed, would the world of sports be better without AI? Or is the genie out of the bottle in a way that's ultimately positive?
Yeah, I think I would reject the binary structure of that question. It's easy to sort of objectify the technology as good or bad. I think, we're using these tools. Yes, there is a material, maybe one could describe it as exponential change in the capacity of this particular technology. So it's not a step change, better software, more access to data. This is something different. I'm a big believer in the idea that technology is in and of itself a human construct. It's not something that exists outside of the judgment that we as human beings applied in its development and in its application. I think the particular risk of large language models and generative AI is that they carry with them, the technology carries with it rather, a fairly easy mechanism to skip that judgment part because it is so fast and because it is so helpful. And certainly there is an extent to which Anthropic and OpenAI have built features in the way that the models work that want you to keep going down the path of reasoning without applying critical judgment and without applying things like adversarial review and checking for bias. But at the end of the day, keeping human judgment central, being transparent in the extent to which that judgment plays a central role in the application, I think puts us in a better place. If you are a writer trying to distill human experience and emotion into a piece of literature, The fact that you may have used a large language model to help facilitate that process, to me, is less relevant than the human experience of consideration, of context, of trying to take what happened to you and your experience in living in the world and bottling that up in art that you share with others. I think the same is true of the software and tools that we build with AI. If our context is good, if our goals are worthy, and if our thought process is critical and pragmatic and applies judgment, there's a whole subfield of academic subfield called computational hermeneutics, which is fascinating topic for another conversation, that really addresses these issues of how you bring human judgment and interpretation into the use of large language models and other computer models. If we do all those things, I think we end up with a mirror on ourselves that allows us to be more honest about our own biases and our own capabilities, and where we're being honest with ourselves more than we've ever been able to before, and how we accumulate knowledge. So I think this is a moment that we're all going through. I think if we are able to appeal to our better instincts in the use of this technology, we will achieve major things, but we have to be very, very thoughtful about preventing the opposite from happening as well.
Moving towards the last question of our conversation, Joel. You've led technology teams for over 25 years, from the early internet days at Playboy.com and Britannica to digital marketing to now sports tech. For CTOs or IT directors thinking about moving into mission-driven spaces like sports, education, or nonprofits, what's one thing you wish someone had told you before you made that leap in your life?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. The first part of my career, I wish I had known how much deep satisfaction there is, or maybe even more deep satisfaction there is, in being able to provide an opportunity for other people to develop their talents. So as a technologist and as a young kind of engineer and system administrator, my focus was on accumulating knowledge and accumulating skill and being able to deliver a better hack and solve a problem more efficiently. And those are all wonderful things. But at a point in time today, especially where large language models begin to make, the possibility of personal software and, sort of the mutability of programming languages and frameworks, like that sort of set of skills is a little bit more ephemeral. I think whether it is finding purpose in the mission of the organization or in the mission of developing or creating opportunities for success for the people around you, where I find really the deepest satisfaction. So, I've been around since encyclopedias were an actual paid product, right? The things that I look back on, with great and deep appreciation and gratitude are, the people who I started working with when I was a very young person, who now have families of their own and have built businesses of their own and careers of their own, largely because we were able to take the adverse and challenging conditions that we found ourselves in, whether those were management teams or business challenges or market challenges or technical challenges, and learn from them and figure out how to create environments in which, we looked at solving problems, not people, at which we created an environment in which, trying to do things better for one another as people, trying to increase our knowledge, trying to increase our adaptability, trying to increase our optionality in the businesses that we were responsible for. Those were skills that applied wherever anyone went. And I think, looking back, I'm picturing the faces in my mind of people, some of whom, many of whom I'm still working with today at IMG Academy, but are in businesses across the planet, who all share this idea that we're here to help each other be more successful. And in helping each other be more successful, we're building better software and technology. And in building better software and technology, we're helping build better businesses and organizations and overall kind of raising all boats in the society. That's something I wish I had known would be so rewarding. As much as I'm proud of the first generation of technology that we built for .com and successive ones, I feel much more gratitude for having been able to help other people achieve their goals and achieve what they can be, which is why my job at the Academy resonates so deeply, because that's what I'm doing every day for student athletes and their families.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for this rounded and insightful conversation. We are really glad to have you with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Rabia. Thank you so much for an excellent conversation, and appreciate the time.
Well, and to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on Tech Unhinged. Until next time.